Although due to the coronavirus and other negative developments in China, such as its stagnated economy, the rise of China has been named the top news story of the 21st century by the Global Language Monitor, as measured by number of appearances in global media and the internet as a whole. Really, it's easy to see why some writers expect at least some sort of Chinese cultural dominance, if not economic dominance, in the future, given the facts that Mandarin is the most spoken language of the world, which is only one of China's native languages. The Han Chinese ethnicity is the world's largest ethnic group. China is the world's second largest country by square mile of dry land, and China is the world's most populated country. Not to even mention that, at least as of recently, China economically has the second highest GDP in the world, was the fastest growing economy, and the largest economy by purchasing power parity. Lastly, it can be argued that China already has had the position as the most powerful nation on Earth, at least economically, since it was the largest economy in the world in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries and the early 19th century. Because of the relatively recent rise of China since the death of Mao and in the 21st century, fiction, and science fiction especially, has risen to the challenge of creating a future where the Chinese culture dominates, or at least tried to dominate in the past, or is more influential than it is now. Obviously, this trope can be seen in franchises like the Fallout series, as well as the lore of Cowboy Bebop, but it's much older than that, as we will see. How far back does it go? Obviously, this old stock character of Fu Manchu is shown to sometimes wanting to take over the world, and it's important to note that his first appearance occurred in 1913. After this, there came Ming the Merciless of Flash Gordon fame, who was clearly inspired by Fu Manchu. Ming was the dictator of the entire planet of Mongo, so his character could also be thought as an example of China takes over the world as well, at least on a planetary scale of sorts. After this, there came the mythos of H.P. Lovecraft that demonstrate the trope of China takes over the world in the 1920s and 30s in a rather obscure ways that most might miss. His short story, He, features a time traveler encounters a future New York City where, and I quote, swarming loathsomely on aerial galleries to saw the yellow, squint-eyed people of that city, robed horribly orange and red. This future Chinese takeover is also hinted at in his stories Nyar Landthotep, which shows a future with yellow evil faces peering from behind falling monuments, or In the Shadow Out of Time, which briefly mentions the cruel empire of Sanchan, which is to come in 5000 AD. Between these epochs, nothing much went on. China existed, but always in the shadow of Western powers. However, with the rise of Marxist-Leninism and the end of World War II, China became communist in 1949 and aligned itself with the Soviet Union, becoming more powerful in the process. This Red Scare combined with old Yellow Peril tropes made for an interesting take on China takes over the world, as we shall see. For example, one of the earliest sci-fi examples in the post-Mao era comes from the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, where an omnipotent being known as Q takes the captain of the Starship Enterprise, Jean-Luc Picard, along with other crew members to a post-World War III kangaroo court. Those in the room either wear Eastern Asian clothing, including Q, or are Asian themselves. Later throughout the Star Trek universe, it was revealed that there was a World War II and it was fought by the quote-unquote Eastern Coalition, which launched attacks against many countries, including the United States. It's also interesting to note that this sort of thing was hinted before early in the Star Trek universe. In an episode of Star Trek the original series, Captain Kirk visits a mirror image of Earth, where the Enterprise crew discovers savages, which are first thought to be Native Americans, but turns out to be the American people who lost the war to the Kangs, their name for the victorious Chinese communists. Lastly, also in the original Star Trek series, at one point intended to be referenced in the first season episode The Carbonite Maneuver, something called the Sino-Western Trouble was mentioned, which was a conflict on Earth that Uhura describes as World War III, almost. Captain James T. Kirk commented about the conflict saying, "The world was lucky it was stopped in time. None of us here would be enjoying life today if, although he trailed off, or was supposed to. So the Eastern Coalition could well be either China or be led by China easily." After the World War III Chinese binge Star Trek The Next Generation, China Takes Over the World wasn't popular outside of small examples, such as the first 1997 Fallout game presents an alternative history setting where the Cold War heats up between the US and China rather than the Russian Soviet Union, at least to a nuclear war, or in the 1997 James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, where China almost enters a war with the United Kingdom, but only because of the actions of a rogue media mogul, who knows that such a war would be, quote, good for ratings. However, in 1998, this trope's popularity exploded with the release of the Japanese anime Cowboy Bebop. The series features a future where, because of a hyperspace accident making the planet Earth uninhabitable, humanity has been forced to colonize the solar system. This calamity somehow leads to a world that has been famously described as 1 part Chinese diaspora and 2 parts Wild West. This Chinese influence is especially seen on Mars, where things like Chinese checkers, Shangqi, things written in Mandarin, and actual Chinese people are all present. Chinese culture's influence is also seen in the characters joking about eating Peking duck throughout the series, joking about eating the dog Ein when first encountering him, and the fact that many of the characters seem to know martial arts instinctively, including the main character Spike, who probably isn't even Asian himself. A very similar series to Bebop also cropped up in its wake in 2002, Joss Whedon's Firefly, the television show. The series also featured a humanity forced to colonize space due to an uninhabitable Earth, as well as a culture that is half Western, half Chinese, albeit for different reasons. In Firefly, resource wars on Earth devastate smaller nations, and thus China and the United States, the remaining stable nation-states, were the countries that were most able to make an interstellar colonization mission possible. This all leads to the cultures of the planets shown in the series being a mix between East, especially Chinese, and West, especially English-speaking Anglo countries. It's also important to note 3 additional important semi-recent developments that led to our modern use of this trope. The rise of Eastern themes and motifs in Western sci-fi, the use of the now mostly dead trope of Japan takes over the world, which you can see as a predecessor trope, and the rise of Eastern nations producing their own sci-fi media, and being more influential with fiction in general. First, the fact that Western sci-fi has adopted Asian motifs and themes can be seen in things like Star Wars' use of Eastern themes and spiritual energy, or Dune's use of Eastern spiritual philosophies and mind-altering techniques, or of course the Matrix trilogy's inspiration from anime and its general use of Asian philosophy and martial arts. Second, like I said, the trope is related to the old trope of Japan takes over the world. Without going into too much detail, this trope was best seen in classic 80s and 90s sci-fi like Blade Runner and Snow Crash. If you need help understanding why this trope influenced China takes over the world, it's basically because it warmed people to the idea of a declining West and an Eastern nation taking its place as a superpower. Even though it can be argued that in these works that Japan did not take over the world, works like Blade Runner and Snow Crash show a world where Japanese culture is much more influential than it is today, and even at this time today. Ignore the details of the Japan takes over the world trope and its origins, which would require its own video. What is interesting about it is how much it influenced the rise of Asian sci-fi, our last consideration. See, one of the most famous anime ever made, Akira, the 1988 film, was highly influenced by Blade Runner, a Western film, and was even set in the same year as it, 2019. Western works have returned the favor in some way, like in the fact that the first Matrix film was highly influenced by the animes Ghost in the Shell and Serial Experiments Lain. Hopefully this relationship between Western media influencing Eastern media and vice versa will continue anyway. But, in conclusion, it's clear that this trope and Asian motifs and styles are clearly present throughout the history of sci-fi as well as fiction as a whole. And if you think that all these examples in fiction of China taking the world are supposed to be negative, or illustrate something negative about the West's perception of China, know that some writers just love an Eastern Asian aesthetic, and just use China taking over the world in the future as an excuse to show such a world. Nevertheless, it is a common trope that has its origins in a less racially tolerant time, that is seeing a comeback to perhaps because of the economic rise of China, as well as the accepting popularity of various Eastern Asian media such as Hong Kong kung fu films, Chinese wuxi, K-drama, and anime/manga, which is, in that case, can be seen as a positive homage to foreign culture's use of story. This is Mr. Fiction 1, hoping you'll subscribe to this channel for more videos like this.